One of the biggest factors that is affecting emerging market investors right now is whether or not we get a trade deal. Is a skinny trade deal now fully discounted by emerging market investors, do you think?
I think so. I mean, there's been a lot of adjustments taking place. You must remember, a lot of the Chinese manufacturers have moved overseas in order to escape the U.S. sanctions. So, in other words, they'll move to Vietnam, Bangladesh, Turkey, wherever they can get low-cost manufacturing and still export to the U.S. Now, this doesn't happen overnight. It takes months, sometimes a year. But it happens, and it can happen a lot faster than people think. So I think a lot of it has already been pretty much discounted. And I believe the impact on the American consumer is not going to be as big as people think because of this rearrangement of the manufacturing.
Okay.
Mark, though, one of the issues, though, with this sort of shift away from China is that the concern is that none of those countries have the same, I guess, scale that China has with regards to its labor force to be able to sort of handle all of the goods that the world demands. Is that sort of fragmented system where maybe you do have things spread out between Vietnam and Bangladesh and all these other countries, is that going to be sort of enough to, I guess, bring a little bit more price stability to the trading market?
For some products, no. I mean, if you look at the kind of technology that China is now producing, it requires millions of parts that are only sourced in China or maybe in Taiwan. So this is going to be a factor on some of these goods. But of course, you must remember that the Chinese have adjusted the exchange rate, and a lot of the manufacturers have also adjusted their pricing. So there'll be a hit for the people that are importing and the people that are exporting, and also they'll be able to adjust according to the exchange rate. But in other words, this is not going to happen overnight. And
right.
Particularly when we're talking about technical things, it will be more difficult for them to move it to another country.
Mark, I'm curious about your thoughts, not so much just on the actual physical goods and services that we're talking about, but really the relationship between the U.S. and China. We had a speech by Mike Pence, Vice President, here yesterday, and somewhat of a reply by the Chinese government. What do you see as the future, I guess, relationship between the U.S. and China, going out, say, I don't know, 5 years?
It's not going to be good going forward. There's going to be a lot of tension, I believe, for many, many reasons. As you know, there's strategic reasons, South China Sea, Belt and Road, concerns of what China is doing in Africa, et cetera, and of course, most importantly, technology transfer. So it's going to be touch and go. It's going to be difficult going forward. And the interesting thing about the U.S. political situation is that both the Democrats and Republicans seem to agree that they've got to be tougher on China. But at the end of the day, both countries need each other, and there will be something worked out. But it's not going to be easy. It's going to be difficult.
If you're running a big multinational in the United States that has exposure into China, Nike, the vice president raised Nike yesterday. The NBA is another obvious example that stands out at the moment. How do you satisfy your U.S. customers and their more liberal attitudes and the Chinese state and Chinese consumers? Can you do it both? Can you do all of it?
Of course, very, very difficult. But the first thing they've got to do, of course, move some of the manufacturing out, particularly to India. India will be the
out of China.
Out of China into India. And they must start looking at India as a big market, just as China is a big market. Now, of course, per capita incomes is way, way different between the two countries. But that's where they've got to look from a long-term perspective. Of course, they can't write off China. China is still going to be very, very important, and they've got to make adjustments to the situation and hopefully convince the American politicians to go easy so that they continue to do business. But at the end of the day, they've got to diversify their sources and their markets.